Coral reef ecosystems. What are coral reefs? Coral reefs are intricate ecosystems that house many species. They are made of stony coral polyps that solidify into a hard calcium carbonate structure, which serves as the base of the coral reef. The structure of coral reefs is maintained over time as polyps grow slowly and expand upon the already solidified base. Where are coral reefs found? Coral reefs are found in the tropics, where the water is warm and shallow. Corals and coral reefs have a symbiotic relationship with algae, requiring them to live in clear water so light for photosynthesis is accessible. Roughly 30 degrees north and south of the equator is where coral reefs are found, as shown in this graph. Corals are in kingdom Animalia, phylum Cnidaria, and class Anthozoa. There are more than 6,000 known species of corals, and some well-known species include stony corals and sea anemones. This is an example of stony coral, and this is an example of a sea anemone. Scleractinians, also known as stony coral. They are composed of many polyps, which are cylinder-shaped organisms that depend on one another for survival. Polyps have a mouth at one end and are surrounded by tentacles. Their bodies are typically clear, but algae grow in their tissues, which causes their color. Algae, specifically zooxanthellae, are extremely helpful to corals. Algae helps to remove waste from corals and undergoes photosynthesis, which provides byproducts as food to the coral. Polyps have minimal organs, but are animals. They function as reef builders, as they secrete calcium carbonate, which is the base for coral reefs. And this is the anatomy of a coral. Scleractinians are broadly grouped into Caribbean Atlantic species and Indo-Pacific species, which live in the Caribbean Sea and the Atlantic Ocean. They can reproduce sexually or asexually, but roughly 3/4 produce through broadcast spawning. Broadcast spawning occurs when stony corals release large quantities of eggs and sperm into water, which distributes their offspring over a large area. The eggs and sperm join and form planktonic larvae called planulae, which is carried by the water current until they settle. Broadcast spawning often occurs as a large, synchronized event, brought about through environmental cues, so that all species in an area release eggs and sperm at the same time. What organisms occur in association with corals? Anabaena is a photoautotrophic, nitrogen-fixing genus that forms symbiotic relationships with some plants. Their cells are cylindrical and are 2 to 10 nanometers in size. Anabaena exists as plankton and uses a gliding motion to move. Its aconites are adjacent to heterocytes, and this is a prokaryote. Cyanobacteria. Cyanobacteria is crucial in coral reef ecosystems as it provides vital nutrients and helps the reef to grow and flourish. Coral reefs typically have small amounts of readily available nitrogen, and once obtained, the nitrogen is turned into a biologically useful form through nitrogen fixation. Cyanobacteria perform nitrogen fixation, which creates vital nutrients for the coral reef. Coral reefs will try to recycle nitrogen if there is not enough, but cyanobacteria help solve the issue through nitrogen fixation, so nitrogen is abundant and in a usable form. There being an abundance of cyanobacteria residing in coral reefs also helps the reefs to grow. Cyanobacteria produces extracellular polysaccharides that create biofilms on recently exposed surfaces and bind grains of sand together to form reef sandflats. These reef sandflats are a site of cyanobacteria and other organisms contributing nutrients to the coral reef. And this is an image of cyanobacteria. Cyanobacteria can also perform photosynthesis. In photosynthesis, cyanobacteria convert sunlight into energy and produce oxygen. The oxygen is useful to the coral reef's growth because it provides them with more vital nutrients. Oxygen is also vital to the rest of the coral reef ecosystem, as fish and other organisms rely on oxygen as a vital nutrient to survive. One-on-one relationships are also common in coral reefs. An example of this is when filamentous cyanobacteria grow on Gorgonian coral and form a symbiotic relationship with alpheid shrimp, whose relationship enhances the growth of the coral. The shrimp live in tunnels made of cyanobacteria and coral, and in turn, protect the cyanobacteria from predators. These types of symbiotic relationships are imperative to the success of the coral reef ecosystem, as a nutrient-rich and protective environment is formed for the animals, cyanobacteria, and coral reefs. Cyanobacteria is the base of the ocean's food chain, specifically within the coral reefs. With the nutrients cyanobacteria provide, organisms are attracted to feed on them, as resources can be scarce. Other plants and animals use the oxygen and nitrogen provided by the cyanobacteria to survive, and may be unable to survive without it. All parts of the ecosystem of a coral reef are integral to one another's survival and success. Animals also provide some resources and nutrients to the ecosystem that plants and other non-mobile organisms may lack. Eukaryotes. Fungi in coral reef ecosystems functions to produce antimicrobial compounds and exchange nutrients with coral and algae. Fungi degrade toxic nitrile compounds and convert nitrogen to usable forms. And this is an example of fungi in a coral reef ecosystem. Other small eukaryotes, such as diatoms and copepods, function as primary producers and recyclers in coral reef ecosystems. Symbiodinium is a microalgae that photosynthesizes copepods. And this is an example of Symbiodinium, and they're roughly 10 nanometers in size. Zooxanthellae. Zooxanthellae are photosynthetic cells that live in coral tissue. They function to supply the coral with amino acids, glycerol, and glucose, as well as producing oxygen and helping to remove waste. In exchange, corals provide the zooxanthellae with a safe habitat and compounds needed for photosynthesis. Zooxanthellae are responsible for the colors of coral. This is an image of a coral polyp, and it shows where the zooxanthellae is. Plants in coral reef ecosystems. Plants are primary producers and convert sunlight into energy, which supports various parts of the coral reef. Some plants in coral reefs include green algae and seagrass. Green algae provide food and are imperative to recycling nutrients. They also help to facilitate photosynthesis. Seagrass is a flowering plant in coral reefs that functions to stabilize the seabed, prevent erosion, and improve the clarity of the water. They are also sources of food for some animals and are a home to small invertebrates and fish. This is an example of green algae, and this is an example of seagrass. Animals in coral reef ecosystems. Both barrel sponges and purple boring sponges occur in coral reef ecosystems. Barrel sponges filter large volumes of water, increase the complexity and stability of habitats, and enhance water quality through nutrient cycling. Purple boring sponges break down and recycle calcium carbonate. Sponges are suspension feeders, meaning that they capture food particles that are suspended in the water and pass through their bodies. Barrel sponges are eaten by fish, turtles, and sea urchins, while purple boring sponges are eaten by creatures in Diodora, Celia, Alpheus, Arbocacia, Silicea, and Doriosilla. This is an example of a barrel sponge, and this is an example of a purple boring sponge. Obelia polyp occur in marine waters and are usually attached to the ocean floor or shells. They function in the ecosystem by generating additional polyps that come together and create a branching structure. Some are responsible for feeding, while others focus on reproduction. They eat nutrients that passes by, and Eubranchus olivaceus eats them. Obelia medusa is the mature form of Obelia polyp and occur in marine waters. They produce eggs and sperm, and creatures such as turtles, sharks, whales, and crabs eat them. Obelia medusa eat phytoplankton. This is an example of Obelia medusa, and this is an example of Obelia polyp. Star coral occur in marine waters and coral reef ecosystems. They grow and provide protection for marine life. They eat algae and zooplankton and are eaten by fish, marine worms, crabs, and snails. Sea fan coral occurs in marine environments such as coral reef ecosystems. Sea fan coral provide shelter for young fish and other organisms with their shape and eat phytoplankton. They are eaten by flamingo tongues, which are predators of soft-eating corals. This is an example of a sea fan, and this is an example of star coral. Hydra live in fresh water and function as predators and prey. They capture food for themselves and discharge food to prey. They eat small animals, such as worms and baby fish, and are eaten by guppies and betta fish, among other omnivorous and carnivorous fish. Aurelia medusa occur in oceans or other bodies of salt water. They function to be a source of food for some fish and turtles and protect some species from harm. They eat plankton, such as mollusks, crustaceans, and protozoans, while they are eaten by birds, fish, and sea turtles. The polyclad flatworm occurs in coral reef ecosystems and functions to be a predator of soft-bodied invertebrates. They eat many small marine reef creatures and are eaten by fish and crabs. This is an example of a polyclad flatworm. The Christmas tree worm lives in tropical coral reefs throughout the world. They function to protect their coral host as well as for catching dinner and respiration. They are ciliary feeders, so catch food as it passes by with their cilia. They are eaten by sea urchins, crabs, and other crustaceans. Loligo are squids that live in the ocean, some living in coral reefs. They function to transport carbon and nutrients between marine ecosystems as they eat and move rapidly, transporting nutrients with them. They eat fish and crustaceans and are eaten by dolphins, whales, sea lions, and birds. Another gastropod is the queen conch, which lives in ocean waters and coral reef ecosystems. They function to stabilize sediment by burrowing into it and maintain an environment where coral can grow. They eat algae and diatoms and are eaten by turtles, sharks, and crustaceans. This is a loligo squid, and this is a queen conch shell. Crabs are crustaceans that clean up the seafloor by eating outlying creatures, and once the crabs are eaten, they pass the nutrients they gain to a predator, so more nutrients enter the food chain. Crabs eat fish, barnacles, plants, snails, plankton, and algae. They are eaten by large fish, birds, and sea turtles. Copepods are tiny crustacean zooplankton that convert the sun's energy into food for animals above them in the marine ecosystem. They are eaten by fish and their nutrients are digested, passing those nutrients up the food chain. They eat phytoplankton. This is a copepod, and this is a crab. Lynchia laevigata is a species of class Asteroidea that primarily lives on the bottom of coral reefs. They function in the ecosystem as scavengers that break down tissues of dead animals, as well as being a host for certain parasites. They eat dead animals and small invertebrates and are eaten by shrimp, fish, sea turtles, and birds. Ophiomastix winti is a species of class Ophiurodia that lives in coral reefs, primarily in the Caribbean. They function to reshape the seafloor sediment. They eat algae and zooplankton and are eaten by fish and crabs. Diadema cetosum live in coral reefs and function in the ecosystem to recycle materials into usable energy for other organisms. They eat dead organisms, and when they are eaten, transfer nutrients into organisms higher on the food chain. They're eaten by black spot tuskfish. Batrillus chlorasi is known as the star tunicate. They live in saltwater and coral reefs attached to stable algae and coral. They function as filter feeders and eat phytoplankton, which gives them nutrients. They help the food chain because when they are eaten, the nutrients they have accumulated pass on to other organisms. They are eaten by crabs, snails, urchins, and starfish. Branchiostoma belcheri are a species of lancelets. They function as inactive filter feeders that bury themselves in sand and filter food particles from their surroundings. They eat bacteria, zooplankton, and diatoms, and are eaten by small crustaceans such as crabs. Zebra sharks are a species of class chondrocytes that live in coral reef ecosystems. They function as predators, regulating prey populations by eating them, which helps coral reef ecosystems to remain healthy. They eat mollusks, crustaceans, and fish, and are eaten primarily by humans as they are towards the top of the food chain. Red lionfish live in coral reefs and function as predators that eat fish, helping to keep the reef ecosystem stable. They eat many kinds of fish and are eaten by sharks, eels, and grouper. This is a zebra shark, and this is a red lionfish. Loggerhead sea turtles inhabit coral reefs and are a species of class Reptilia. They function to recycle important nutrients and keep the ocean floor sediments in balance, as well as carrying colonies of small plants and animals on their shells, providing a habitat for them. Loggerhead sea turtles eat whelks and conch and are eaten by sharks and humans. Population biology. Coral reefs inhabit clear photic zones of tropical oceans and are sensitive to temperatures above 30 degrees Celsius and below 18 degrees Celsius. There is a diverse animal population in coral reefs. However, corals are the predominant animal present. Humans have affected coral reefs as overfishing and collection of coral skeletons is prominent, which reduces populations of corals. Pollution and global warming is also thought to have a negative impact on coral reef ecosystems. Dispersion of species in coral reefs is present in animals such as sea stars, who clump together around food sources. This is an example of sea stars clumping around a food source. Species interactions, symbiotic relationships. Some examples of some symbiotic relationships in coral reef ecosystems include zooanthellae and corals, sea anemones and clownfish, and shrimp and large marine organisms. Zooanthellae live in coral tissue. They function to supply the coral with amino acids, glycerol, and glucose, as well as producing oxygen and helping to remove waste. In exchange, corals provide the zooanthellae with a safe habitat and compounds needed for photosynthesis. Sea anemones protect clownfish by allowing them to live within the sea anemone, and in exchange, clownfish help the sea anemone get food by luring prey over or allowing the anemone to consume leftovers. Shrimp remove parasites from larger marine organisms, keeping the organisms healthy, and in return, the shrimp get a meal from the parasites. All these examples represent symbiotic relationships that help to keep coral reef ecosystems thriving. Ecosystems and energy. All organisms within an ecosystem work together to keep the ecosystem thriving. Energy keeps an ecosystem functioning, and in coral reef ecosystems, energy from the sun is photosynthesized by algae and gets passed up the food chain. Fish then eat the algae, and predators eat fish, passing the chemical energy throughout the food chain. And this is an example of a food pyramid. Conservation. Pollution, invasive species, ocean acidification, climate change, changing water temperatures, and impacts from humans and storms are all factors contributing to the damage of coral reef ecosystems. 30 to 50% of coral reefs have already been wiped out from these factors. Organizations around the world are helping to conserve coral reef ecosystems through tactics such as improving corals' habitat through research and development of activities to preserve corals, as well as identifying major risk areas and helping to restore the coral reef and stop further damage. NOAA, also known as the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, is one organization working to help coral reef ecosystems. They are building up corals' response to climate change through genetics, planting nursery-grown corals into coral reefs, and ensuring habitats are suitable for coral growth. With the help of organizations and people around the world, coral reef ecosystems can be conserved.